You are about to enter the no superstition zone of rational thinking and intellectual curiosity here on the Atheist Forum. Standing by for your questions or comments at 727-441-3000, where you can talk to a real live atheist here on Tan Talk 1340.
That's right, it's the voice of atheism in Florida. Our website, talk.aof.ngo, where you can hear reruns of this program and the archives of all of them. And your chance to insult an atheist for only $2. Call us at 441-3000 and give us the benefit of your opinion. Ed Golly in studio on the Atheist Forum with the usual suspects in the studio with me. Joe Reinhardt, Tracy Thomas, Jim Peterson,
Hello.
And the usual gang. We like to start with our default position. Joe, how is Melania Trump coming along with her campaign to eliminate cyberbullying?
Well, you know, Ed, we got some really, really big news. In fact, two headlines this week.
Good.
First, Melania went out and bought a white hat.
Nice.
It was in all of the news articles. It was on every network. I saw more information about Melania's white hat in one 12-hour period than I don't know. I saw more about her hat than I have probably read in my entire life on any subject. So apparently, having a white hat is the first step to launching her long-awaited and much-touted anti-bullying campaign.
Nice.
So she bought a white hat. I don't know how well it's worked. I haven't seen the weekly bullying report. I don't know whether it's up or down, but I do know that if you were wondering how Melania would follow up with that white hat, the answer is that she is causing a frenzy. I repeat, a frenzy in a tall white hat, welcome the French president. And now she's prepared a lavish meal in a Chanel dress. That's right. She's bought a new dress to go with her white hat. Well, it doesn't match the white hat. She wears it separately. But she bought a hat and a dress. I think she's now ready to start anti-bullying, because if anybody says anything bad about her hat or her dress, I'm sure she could do some serious butt-kicking and teach them not to belittle her fashion choices ever again. And that's the Melania bullying report for this week, which is, it depends on what you wear.
Was that Chanel or Chenille?
Well, you know, it may just be an urban legend.
It's Channel.
But I think I saw on the internet, and as we all know, everything on the internet is true, that America's first gold digger is actually planning to divert her campaign from cyberbullying to addressing her attention to exposing politicians who lie with regularity and seek to bring them to the world's attention. Not sure where she's going to start to find such a politician, but there must be a few within easy reach to her.
Well, I think there are at least one that's trying to hold her hand and is not having much luck. So she may be able to reach out and grab one of those with a little effort.
Well, following the death of a passenger on a Southwest Airlines flight last week, we are just waiting for President Donald Trump to step forward and assume full responsibility for that fatality. After all, it was only a few weeks prior to that he claimed full responsibility for the previous fatality-free year of air travel in the nation, allowing that regulations he had nothing to do with but claimed to have implemented resulted in the perfect year of air travel. It only stands to reason, then, that he's going to take responsibility, right?
Wait a minute. He was taking responsibility for regulations that he had not written, yet he is the president of deregulation, as I recall.
Yeah.
So wait a minute, hold the phone, Jack.
I understand he also nominated his corporate pilot to head the FAA.
I hate to belabor the obvious, but you know, as an atheist, I've been known to point out in the past that this is a trademark of religion, and that is that anytime there's something successful, food programs or diplomacy or you name it, anytime there's a successful program, the church will find some way to take credit for it. So if the starvation rate goes down in such and such a country, it's because they took them all this food and other aid. They don't mention the fact that somebody gave them all of that food to give away. They didn't buy it with their own money. And they didn't mention the fact that there are all kinds of secular organizations that do the same thing and have been doing the same thing long before they ever co-opted it as their own. But that's just one minor example.
Yeah.
Well, if the churches appropriate credit for that, well, I think that could be a good thing, because if they're taking credit for science and accurate history and a tradition of truth-telling in all respects, then let them appropriate that. I think as a service to society in general and to the progress of religion, nothing could be more praiseworthy than their attempt to try to take on those burdens.
And of course, who's always the bad guy? That would be us. We atheists are always, for some reason, frowned upon by society simply because we're not superstitious.
Well,
I don't get it.
We're abominations, every one of us. We do no good, none at all. That would, of course, be the 14th Psalm.
Even though we do not bomb nations.
And that, of course, is consistent with a sermon delivered at the Islamic Center of South Florida in Pompano Beach, March 23rd. Imam Hasan Sabri claimed that atheists were incapable of living a, quote, wholesome life, unquote, and that we're nothing more than a worm in the body of Muslims. This guy's from Florida. He says atheists always belong to minorities, national minorities, religious sects or minorities, and they have an agenda of destroying this Islamic nation, so they adopt atheism, not because it makes sense, but because it serves their approach. A quote from his sermon is that is the call of such people. They are calling you, and what's the result? What would a person who denies the existence of Allah, even on a personal level, achieve? Forget that he becomes a worm in the body of Muslims, a germ that is causing disease and weakness to his nation. What is he going to achieve? The feeling of insecurity, the feeling of doubt, the feeling of fear, the feeling of uncertainty, that you do not have protection in this life. You do not have a source that is stable, where you can draw patience from, where you can draw perseverance from. You do not have high standards that come from a higher being for you to live for. You're becoming like an animal. You're living just to wake up and sleep, to wake up and sleep. I think there's something else we do and eat. And so, anyway, there's no wholesome life as meaning as what an atheist is, and that is what an atheist is going to achieve. It's hard to believe we're living in the same country. Now, who the heck knew that the U.S. was an Islamic nation?
I'd like to point out that the Imam in question was a panelist at the Interfaith and Race Relations Peace and Acceptance Conference. I guess there are limits to the Imam's ability to be peaceful and accepting. In other words, if you happen to look, think, and act like he does, come right on in. The rest of you, watch your back.
Yeah. It's always amazing to me how many believers think that the only way that you can be moral or ethical is to follow some invisible being's guidance, rather than, what makes a good person. A good person is a person who follows the guidelines of our culture, not necessarily our religion. And that varies from location to location. So what makes a good person here is a little bit different from what makes a good person in other nations, of course. But it certainly has nothing to do, being a good person, following rules and not being hedonistic, has nothing to do with whether or not you believe in the supernatural.
Sure, and if you're a good person because of fear, are you a genuinely good person?
Uh-huh.
If you're a good person that doesn't have that fear, then you clearly are. Well, this guy can't grasp that.
Yeah, I noticed that he accuses us of having a high FUD factor. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's what we're accused of. And actually, if you look at it carefully, those are actually, well, at least some of them are good things. Doubt and uncertainty is a profession of someone who
It's the fuel
needs,
of progress, right?
Right.
That's
progress.
how we
need knowledge. Now, the fear, of course, I would agree with them on fear, except that we're not the proponents of fear. We are instead the proponents of curiosity, of looking out to find out what is the nature of the world and ourselves. That's what we're the proponents of. But as far as uncertainty and doubt go, I'm all in favor of those things. Those are very creative things.
As Tracy pointed out, I'm constantly amazed by people that think that it's a reasonable question, who are genuinely puzzled at how anyone can get their morals or ethics or have any understanding of right and wrong, good and bad, unless they have the guidance of some, supernatural being of some sort. And I'm willing to concede that that's true. In fact, I'm willing to concede that it's true, and I want to point out that they just discovered the remains of somewhere between 140 and 200 children who were sacrificed to the rain gods in Peru. And I guess that's where they get their morals. So if they get their morals from the Almighty, and it's perfectly all right to murder innocent infants in order to please or change the weather to suit yourself, I have to ask, well, what kind of morals are you getting? May I ask? Don't you think you ought to vet those morals just a little? At least make some discernment as to some moral systems are better than others. Beheading people for infidelity is probably not the best system to achieve maximum happiness for the population at large. That's just one example of how the argument that, well, we need to get our morality, or we can only get morality if we have a belief in the supernatural or the Almighty. If that were true, God help us, because the morality of many deities ranges from the tantrum of a child to the adulterous behavior of adults. In mythology and religion, well, they're the same thing. The behavior of the gods is deplorable.
And not only that, going off on what Ed said a minute ago, the most childish way to look at morals and ethics is to say, well, if I do this, I will be rewarded, and if I do this, I will be punished. There is no more childish way, because that's exactly how you treat a child, right? You don't. Yeah. You say, you do this, I'm going to reward you. You do this, I'm going to punish you. Don't ask me why. It's because I said so.
And then look at how many societies through history that had never heard of Christianity or the Ten Commandments still lived what we would consider ethical lives. They didn't go around and murder each other. They had respect for each other's property and so on, meaning that we don't really need that to structure a society where people have respect for each other's properties and rights and liberty. And yet, under the Christian guidance, our country was very oppressive to women. We engaged in genocide against native peoples. We brought 4 million people into slavery. And we say, well, this country, those were the Christian values this country was framed on. When that book or when that religion says it's okay to do something, we can do anything, including dropping nuclear bombs on people. There's no limit to the horrible things that can be done.
We're encouraged.
Exactly, in the name of religion.
Leave nothing that breatheth.
What part of thou shalt not? Don't you understand? Well, they don't. There's always a way to spin it or twist it.
What part of leave nothing that breatheth do you not understand?
Right. Well, they say that ignorance is no excuse. And generally, I think most of us would concur.
It's working pretty well for the president, isn't it?
Well,
he doesn't know what the hell's going on. Thinks he knows everything. Considers himself a genius.
We'll see what happens when it comes to a second term.
Train of thought, right. Jimmy. Go ahead.
No, but what I'm thinking, however, is that to a large extent, people constructed these things. The ancient Peruvians, Egyptians, our own European ancestors, all over the world. People constructed religious responses that often included truly barbaric activities of one sort or another. And I think it largely has to do with the fact that they are ignorant of what, in fact, is actually the case in terms of understanding the world in which they lived. So when the Peruvians wanted to ensure rain, they didn't understand meteorology. They didn't understand anything to do with the hydrological cycle or anything of that sort. All they knew was that if they sacrificed some kids, that it would rain thereafter, which it's always did. It was amazing.
I'd like to take the side of the Peruvians and the Mayans, if I may, and even the Aztecs.
Well, first introduce yourself.
Oh,
This
I'm sorry.
is Las.
My name is Laz. Very nice to be joining all of you today. Thank you
Our
for
special
thank you for
guest
having me.
today.
Atheist. He's a
Appreciate
veteran
it.
infiltrator. We're not sure, but he's here. So go ahead.
He's something.
He snuck in.
Yes.
Neat. Such word is snug.
It's not,
ahead.
okay. I often have that effect on people. One thing that I'd like to point out and make the case that the Peruvians, as well as the Mayans and the Aztecs, when Cortez landed in what today is Mexico is, and he saw the Aztecs sacrificing other people, notably people they captured in battle, that was at least a couple of 100 years ago. Since then, I'd like to think that we have progressed somewhat scientifically and have now an understanding of what nature is and what the world consists of. We know that the world is not flat. I don't care how much a basketball player wants to pertain to make that argument the world is not flat. We know that. We can make the calculations, right? But what is the excuse of people nowadays in 2018 to spew the same nonsense and to rise up in defense of the same barbaric institutions that we were employing 400 or 500 years ago? We have progressed beyond that, but it sounds like a lot of people have not, and they're still clinging to that same thing.
That's a very good point, because I saw something the other day which indicated that large numbers of people are signing up for the Flat Earth Society, if you can believe that.
Right, they have offices all over the globe.
Nice point, Joe.
Well, I think it's safe to say the theme of our program tonight is intolerance. And it's interesting how religions are so intolerant of each other. In Pompano Beach, a Muslim cleric's prayer at the start of a commission meeting provoked an uproar over there, prompting officials to consider an end to religious petitions altogether. This is what we consider to be progress, of course.
Yeah, right.
And it's the same guy, Imam Hasan Sabri, delivered an invocation at a meeting in February, first in Arabic and then in English. A dozen or so speakers who are mostly from out of town have appeared at multiple city meetings to slam commissioners. Critics faulted the officials for allowing prayer in a foreign language by a local Muslim leader whose religion and culture differ from practices of other faiths. And then last month, it was early this month, city resident and conservative radio host Joyce Kaufman told the commission that she worships at the Hopewell Baptist Church there. And here's what she said, quote, "It is the tradition of this land that people be tolerant of one another's religious beliefs. However, once any group or religious organization evidences an ideology that conflicts with our Judeo-Christian values and our principles, it is incumbent upon you to safeguard your constituents," unquote. In other words,
Gobbledygook.
you have all the freedom to be any
Yeah,
religion
except
you
when
want
you
as
don't.
long as it's ours.
Yeah, except when you don't. Right. And we're the ones who say when you don't.
He should be asked the question, what do you mean by safeguard? That's
My God
the
can beat up
question
your
here.
God? Is that the scenario we're looking at?
It's just,
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. My God can beat up your God?
Yeah.
Is that the scenario
right.
that
Well,
she's proposing?
sometimes that works,
Yeah.
if you can get them to cooperate.
Sure.
but it's incumbent of all religions to be intolerant of all others, right?
Yeah.
Because they all claim they know the true and real God, and everybody else is just guessing or is misguided. And it doesn't end there. It goes on to the point where even in the Christian religion, you're told to kill everybody who doesn't believe the way you do, whether they believe a different religion or none at all. There's no difference between the commandments of Christianity and the Muslim religion, only that they take it more seriously. Am I right, Joe?
Oh yeah, as long as your religion is vastly the majority, 95+%, then there's little or no problem with discrimination and intolerance, because the competition isn't that keen.
Mm-hmm.
But the race relations are the same way. When you get to a state where there are equal numbers or maybe a slight majority of one race or another, then race becomes a big issue. And when you get into a society where there are lots of religions and there are competitions between religions, then tolerance goes right by the wayside, because particularly in Abrahamic religions, where you have this belief in an eternal hereafter, you cannot have a belief in an eternal hereafter and be tolerant. It's philosophically an impossibility. I cannot tolerate some other religion that might teach my child or tell my child something that would cause them to doubt our religion and therefore deprive them of their eternal, immortal, everlasting soul. And believe me, if I thought you were going to kill one of my children, I would off you so fast you wouldn't have time to record it. But certainly, what could I do to you if I thought you were going to steal not just this life, but their eternal life? Well, my goodness, there's just no limit to what I can do. And so technically, the more fervently I honestly believe in my religion and the results of not believing in my religion, the less likely I am to be tolerant, only as a matter of self-defense. It's not because I hate everybody that doesn't look like me. That's just a minor reason.
I'm thrilled to say, we've said this on several occasions, and I'm thrilled to keep saying, and that is that the population of people that are not affiliated with religion in this country is growing. It's growing and growing. It's about 22 to 25% overall, and people under 30, it's probably about 30%. So I'm thrilled to keep repeating that statistic.
Well, it's a danger, too, because as it gets closer to 50 to 55%, people like I, ma'am, your ma'am, pardon me, ma'am, are going to become far more strident and far more insistent about stomping out this disease before it, shall we say, contaminates or kills the body religious.
One thing I might observe, however, is that an imbalance in the racial composition of the population does not in itself cause conflict, but rather is because of the associations, the historical and particularly religious associations of various elements in the population that causes them to develop racial animosities. And this is particularly important in our world because we are experiencing a good deal of conflict between people of various races. But often as not, the root of it, the basis of it, is often religious and ethnic. People, again, fear would be the major factor. People are afraid that someone of a different race, a different religion, a different point of view, whatever the differences are, they get amplified all out of proportion, and people exist in a state of fear, and this is what promotes the conflict. For us as atheists, of course, we don't cling to the same sorts of values in terms of having a religious axe to grind. And I like to think that most of us see everyone, all people, as being essentially equal. If you have a brain between your ears, then you're just the same as I am, and you're just as entitled as I am to every conceivable civic amenity.
Well, yes, you did hear him say the word atheist. If you've just joined us recently, you're listening to the Atheist Forum here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. We're talking about intolerance and other topics here, and invite you to join us at 441-3000, where you can weigh in and insult an atheist or just give us the benefit of your opinion. We're going to take just a moment to tell you about the organization that sponsors the program, which is Atheists of Florida, and then we will continue.
Atheists of Florida is a nonprofit membership organization founded in 1992. For over 25 years, Atheists of Florida has brought atheists together to address state-church separation issues, provide legal assistance in cases of religious discrimination in employment or educational institutions, help atheists meet others who want to live their lives free of religion, and produce the Atheist Forum. For membership information, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com, where you'll find our newsletters, annual reports, statement of purpose, and information about meetings and events. That's atheistofflorida.com. Here, you can hear archives of our programs either here on Tan Talk's website, on the WTAN website, or on the Atheists of Florida site at talk.aof.ngo. Joe, our quote of the week, please.
Well, happily I have one tonight from the ever-popular Robert Greene Ingersoll in discussing the Ten Commandments, specifically the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. And he says, you know, has there ever been a society whose members did not object to being murdered? Talk about belaboring the point.
And Las, you want to follow up on something that Jim was saying, I think?
Yeah, one quick thing about that. You were talking about the 20% versus 25%, and then you mentioned that when it gets to 50%, then religion has a real problem because now you have an uprising on your hand and you don't know how to stem it. The amount of information that's available out there is increasing on a day-to-day basis about the world. It's going to be impossible for religion to keep at the current state that they're in unless they're keeping track. The way they're hijacking science is a prime example of how they're trying to keep track with modern times. I've heard somebody say, I'm not going to quote them verbatim, somebody said a couple of weeks ago to me that the reason why we can see DNA, the reason why we can detect genes inside the human body is because God put them there so that we can find them. And my question was, why did it take 2,000 years for us to be able to find and develop the technology?
Why keep it a secret?
Why keep it a secret?
Yeah.
And so religion has a real problem, and the more information is out there, that's why governments around the world are trying to keep the World Wide Web from reaching the people that would like to use them, because they understand that not only religion, but in general, dictatorships and any kind of a system that seeks to, as you were saying very accurately, to promote an intolerance or any kind of a suppression has a real problem, and people have the information.
And don't you think that that's the primary reason that we're starting to see the numbers of the percentages of the population that rejects religion dramatically increase along with the embracing of the internet? Because, 50 years ago in Mayberry, if somebody questioned religion, they go to bed without dinner, right? But now they can look on the internet and start questioning it. They can hear people like Dawkins and Hitchens explain the fundamental flaws of it and objectively assess it, where that wasn't accessible in the past. And so I think that that's probably the major influence on the the decline of religion in this country. They're way ahead of us in Europe, where those numbers have been much higher for years, for whole generations.
And suppressing the information is going to become the primary goal of a lot of those societies, and a lot of the religious leaders are going to subject their people to a weekly brainwashing session, essentially, instead of preaching as they're normally supposed to do. They're actually going to try to suppress their people with, all kinds of horrific tales about what will happen if they give up their religion.
Of course.
This is also the reason why people should be extremely concerned about the issue of net neutrality.
Absolutely, 100%.
Because that would certainly sidetrack and help to suppress the kind of information we've been talking about.
Right. I would agree with that 100%. The more information you have available out there, the better decision you can make about the world. Medicine is a prime example. We know what causes diseases. It's not being invaded by the devil. It's not Satan, going into somebody's body. It's germs. It's bacteria. We know this. We can figure this out. Doctors can treat it. It's no longer about hocus pocus. Same thing will happen with religion sooner or later.
It's like the kid over in England, right? The 2-year-old that was done, and the Pope wanted to take him to Italy to treat him.
Yeah, he's in a vegetative state.
Yeah,
I believe
the medical community said that there's no hope for this child. He's going to die. Here was our opportunity for the Pope to put put prayer to the test, right? And pray that the child would just come out of this condition he was in and live a normal life. I mean, he should have the closest direct line to this God that anybody in the world has. That's his claim.
Did he make such a prayer?
Of course not, because he knew it would fail, right? But that was his chance to prove
I know
it.
when Mother Teresa had a heart attack, she was actually in the Vatican in Rome, and again, rather than pray over her and use up some of his political capital with the Almighty, they put her on a jet plane, flew her out to the Scripps Institute in San Diego, put a stent in her heart, and she was walking around for another decade after that.
Kind of
Patients
amazing.
were not afforded the same
Of
ability.
course, yeah. No, they were left to lie on a straw mat on a concrete floor attended to by nuns who had no medical training of any kind. And they were, I guess the idea was they were suffering for the way that Jesus did, and this was their avenue to heaven.
Tempers the soul.
Yeah. But boy, she didn't buy into that when she had a medical problem, did she?
Well, and she even admitted right towards the end of her life in her book, as you know, that she didn't believe half of that stuff herself.
Wow.
Miracles are very hard to come by.
Yeah.
There's a place called Lourdes in France, I'm sure you're all familiar with, where pilgrims go with various diseases and problems, and they go to get a miracle cure.
Yeah.
But among the artifacts that are left there, including crutches and prosthetics and so forth, there are no glass eyes.
No wooden legs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
none of those things, because they don't really get cured. Many people get they get feeling better because of the
Placebo
placebo
effect.
effect. Exactly.
It's a staggering
It is
number.
a powerful thing. Placebo.
Pardon the pun, but there's a staggering number of people at Lourdes who cripple themselves trying to crawl up to the shrine because they think that gives them, more
mojo?
more mojo with the all mojo mighty.
It also
Almighty
gives them more calluses too. But
Isn't it the same euphemistic feeling that people on TV get when they go up to these millionaire preachers who are asking for money, and they get healed on stage, and a week later they're worse off because they stopped taking their medication, or they are not following their doctor's orders anymore because they got healed by Jesus, right?
A friend of mine,
And
his
so
brother
they don't
was a
get interviewed after
diabetic.
that.
Yeah, exactly.
Died from that. Gave up his medicines because of some preacher, and 6 months later he was dead from insulin shock, diabetic.
It's amazing how God can be defeated by simple medicine.
Yeah.
You know, it really truly is amazing.
Well, I think Mother Teresa was the perennial bag man for the Vatican for the 20th century. When, probably nobody outdid her for just sheer income. Yeah.
Well, here's one thing I'm baffled by when it comes to Christianity and many religions, and that is that the supposed idea is that when you die, you're going to go to a better place, a beautiful paradise. Things are much better, right?
New Jersey?
And that's the ticket. I hadn't thought of that. So if that is the case, then why do people go to doctors? Why would they not want to facilitate an earlier death so they can go to this beautiful paradise? Sure. I just don't get it. Why?
Why bother to slow down for stop signs?
Yes.
Besides, if God has a plan for you, and his plan doesn't include you having a broadside or a head-on collision at a stop sign, why would you bother to slow down?
Well, that's the irony of our state motto, "In God We Trust." When we atheists ask, how does anybody trust in a God? If we did, we wouldn't need hospitals, right? We wouldn't need a military. We wouldn't need science. We would just say, God takes care of everything, and if a tree falls on my head and cracks I just pray and everything will be fine. But in fact, I don't see a demonstration anywhere in society where we trust in any God for anything.
It's even more of a mystery because God himself says he can't be trusted, and if you look at his record along that line, we can see that he can't be trusted. He's made numerous covenants with Abraham and other dozen or so that you could rattle off. Give me little time to go look them all up. But the point is that he never consults anybody. He changes the rules unilaterally. I mean, he's worse than Facebook. It's just from now on, you don't have to make burnt sacrifices. What you have to do is pray to my son here.
Are you saying he's totally unregulated?
I'm saying he's totally operates by fiat. And if you don't like the new covenant, you are just out of luck. And for that reason, he can't be trusted.
Wow. You're right, Ed, though. If we truly trusted in God, we wouldn't need 911.
That's right.
Would we?
And so now our state legislature, in its wisdom, has implemented a regulation that says that in every public school building in this state, we will post our state motto. And it's to be done prominently so that it's clearly visible. You can't just scotch tape a penny to the wall because it's there, but you wouldn't really notice it. And so this, to me, is an effort by some of the legislators to really establish religion. I mean, they're kind of coming in through the back door, but they're trying to imply that to be the best citizen and to be, a correct citizen, you will subscribe to the God beliefs. Yet, the real foundation of our Constitution is that the government will remain completely neutral with respect to religion. It is never the job of anybody in government to make any effort to influence the citizen on what to think about religion or what to believe or not believe.
That's right. Our town halls and our schools are not halls of worship.
They're not.
They're not. They're halls of learning. They're halls of government, but not
we
halls
know that
of
our
worship.
nation's original motto, even though it wasn't legally incorporated, was E pluribus unum and had nothing to do with religion. When our Pledge of Allegiance was formulated, it had no reference to any gods in it. That was corrupted by Eisenhower in the 50s for that exact reason. He wanted every school child every morning in America to swear some form of allegiance to a god so that they would believe that that's the correct path to proper citizenship, is to subscribe to the God ideas. And so he was doing exactly what the Constitution didn't want him to do. Yet here he was the president. All right, Joe.
Well, the woman who introduced...
Time's up. Oh.
Mercifully. The woman who introduced this bill for the mandatory In God We Trust plaques is, in fact, a minister. She preaches at some church over on the
Jacksonville
East Coast area somewhere there. And if you read some of what she had to say in support of her proposal, it sounded very much like a sermon, that we needed these signs to bring us out of the darkness and into the light. The signs are not required to be incandescent, as far as I know. So I don't see how that will affect the amount of light in the room.
It's the same premise. That
one way or the other.
People don't know how to behave unless they have a fear of some almighty God and the wrath he will bring upon them in the future if they don't behave, which is complete nonsense. Because what segment of the population has the highest percentage of people that embrace religion?
People in jail?
Yes, in prison. The prisoners, for Christ's sake. Wake up, America. Come on.
Have you all heard about the great Scandinavian war of the 20th century? Where all the Scandinavian countries got together and decided they're going to go to war against each other and the rest of the world because of their religious beliefs. That didn't happen, did it? Right? No. That didn't happen, right?
No,
they're the least religious countries in the world.
Yeah,
and yet they managed to live in peace,
yeah.
Relative peace. They don't fight with each other. I've been to Denmark, I've been to Finland, I've been to Sweden. Perfectly nice, reasonable people.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose
there's not open rape being conducted in the streets. I can't understand this.
They're not running rampant, murdering each other, yet they're not religious.
Well, Loss, it has a lot to do with hypocrisy, and I've said it before and I say it again. The first avenue to becoming a conservative is to master the art of
hypocrisy.
Florida governor has suspended Hernando County Commissioner Nick Nicholson, who was arrested on April 19th on charges of operating allocation for the purpose of lewdness, assignation, or prostitution, and 2 counts of purchasing services from a person engaged in prostitution. Guess what political party Nicholson belongs to? That would be your base.
Atheist?
One of them.
The Family Values Party. Do as I say, but not as I do. In a nutshell, the charges against Nicholson were quoted by the governor's deputy communications director as being disturbing and unbecoming of someone who is supposed to serve the citizens of Hernando County. Well, what happened is in February, deputies were called to a Spring Hill home after a couple living with him got into a dispute. What happened was the guy frequented strip clubs. And so he, a few years ago, actually, had found some stripper and got her to move in with him, and he would drive her around to pay her bills, buy drugs, and yet, even when he was, as you pardon the expression, exposed for doing that, he was still reelected because these conservatives have no actual values, right? They just care about who's in there as a Republican. And so now he ended up finding another stripper who's married, invited the husband and her to move in with him, and every Tuesday and Saturday he's boinking her for $100 and $200 respectively, and she's bringing tricks right into the house, John's into the house, and servicing them in this commissioner's house. So what happened was that the husband and the hooker got into some kind of a domestic argument. He threw a screwdriver at it, and somehow that led to a call to the cops who came in and said, "Yeah, what's going on here?" Right? And they pinched the guy. So the governor has the ability to remove any of these officials, for conduct that they consider to be inappropriate, and then he being the governor can appoint a replacement for him. But it's just the same old thing from the conservatives: do as I say, but not as I do. I'll set all the family values for you, but don't look while I just ignore them completely.
Well, in some fairness to the voters, why they may not have been aware of the commissioner's hijinks, shall we say, when they voted him in. Were they aware he was voted in several times? So you mentioned he had one incident before the last election, and they voted him in anyway?
Yes,
oh.
Yes.
Well, there's a little hypocrisy to go
around.
Have you
heard of who's the president of this country, Jimmy?
No.
To Jim, hello. It grabs women by the... Well, I better not say it.
It amazes me how people in the Republican Party, they always want to talk about deregulation. When they talk about deregulation, they're talking about deregulation for corporations. They want to make life easier for corporations to make it in this world. However, as you and I both know, they are definitely not for deregulation when it comes to individuals.
Right.
They want to continuously regulate how individuals live their lives, yet, as you were saying, they are the masters of hypocrisy.
Well, and here's the thing about it. So, and I'm probably going to get some flack for this later on from some people. I don't believe that prostitution should be illegal, because it has been proven time and again that it hurts the people that it's trying to regulate the most, right?
Sure.
They don't have insurance, talking about mainly the women that participate in this industry. They don't have insurance. They don't have protection from, scumbags out there. They don't have health care. They have to pay for everything on their own, and they risk going to jail every time that they try to make money. So making prostitution illegal is in accordance with that same biblical values or religious values that we like to hold up in this country as such a mantra of justification for everything that's good in the world. But we never take responsibility. Religion never takes responsibility for the crap that it causes as a result of that. Now this guy, if he wants to engage in prostitution, you know what? Be my guest.
He's just following the example set by the president. He must have a higher political agenda, right?
He must be able to run for governor one day, right?
That's our John in chief, right?
But like you said, I don't want it to be
Donald Trump, for crying out loud. Are you kidding me?
But I don't have a problem with him engaging in that activity. Now, of course, once it crossed the line, it became a legal dispute because of the assault. That's a different thing. But
he wasn't involved in that. That was between the husband and the wife.
Well, the cops came out for the assault,
that
right?
They were living in his house. Yeah, he wasn't mixed up in that.
So I'm okay with him wanting to visit prostitutes as long as it's a legal activity. But then
It
we don't want to
isn't.
be preached to
Exactly.
from him and others like him
Well,
about
well,
the
the-
evils of society, and then bringing up religion to justify their actions, because that's just BS.
You know,
The fundamental question in that regard is one of personal liberty.
Right.
That is, in whose charge should your body be? Should it be yours?
That's exactly right.
Or should it be, to some extent, that of the state? What interest does the state have? Well, the state does have some interest, I should think, in protecting the health and safety of its citizens.
Which they could do better if it were legal.
Well, that's entirely possible. But we have never examined the question in that light. It's always been examined in the question of, well, is it in accord with biblical precepts?
We haven't, but there are
Nonsense of
other
that
countries. Holland, it is
Sure.
legal.
Yes, there are.
The sex workers there even have a Bill of Rights.
well,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, that's a good point.
A lot of years, the Atheists of Florida participates in the St. Pete Times, now the Tampa Bay Times Festival of Reading. Last year, a passerby stopped at our table and stated that he didn't like Democrats because, and I'm quoting him, they're always telling everybody what to do, unquote. Now, Atheists of Florida is not affiliated with any political party. And in fact, we're prohibited from offering political endorsements. But I wondered if he could offer an example of this tyranny. His response was that Democrats always want to take away everybody's guns. And so because of that, he perceives these Democrats as telling everybody what to do. Now, I think about conservatives. Conservatives seek to prohibit homosexuals from marrying whomever they love. They dictate what people can put into their bodies. They dictate laws on what we were just talking about, prostitution, which is between consenting people.
Drugs.
Censor what we read, view, or listen to. Dictate what we can or cannot do with consenting partners in the privacy of our homes. Reconfigure the education system so it's based entirely on a religious view of the world. But name any Democrat, name anyone who's ever advocated for the confiscation of all the firearms or seeks in any other way to control us. I've never heard any liberal or progressive or Democratic politician say that my platform is to confiscate every gun in the country.
Well, I would like to see all the guns confiscated that are pointed at me.
And loaded, right?
And Ed, I would just like to add to that list that you just gave us reproductive rights for women as well.
Right. Yeah,
mean, there's just
exactly.
such a
Forcing
list.
women to bear children that they can't afford, they don't want to. And I was kind of amazed at this guy to sit here and tell me that the progressives and the liberals want to control everybody's lives when it's really the conservatives. And he doesn't even see it that way. Probably because he agreed with all of these restrictions. He thinks that this is the restriction portfolio that should be unleashed on all of us by the government. That's the government's responsibility. So it isn't in any way hampering us or restricting our freedoms.
As long as it didn't have something to do with the Second Amendment, he was prepared to endure any injustice that befell someone else.
And that goes right back to the commissioner up in Hernando County, I think I said it was, that, it's the same thing. He's a conservative who's perfectly willing to tell you what you can or can't do, but he'll do whatever he wants.
A good example, again, of the hypocrisy in relation to the gun laws and the Second Amendment. There was a state senator or representative introduced a law to make it illegal for anyone to get with a firearm to get within 1,000 feet of an elected politician in the state of Florida. And Robin Blumner wrote an editorial, said, the hell with that. I want them to pass a law that they can't get within 1,000 feet of me.
Yeah, or else I have to stay within 100 feet of a politician all my life.
I don't want to have
safe.
to be holding some politician's hand everywhere I go.
Well, here's the problem.
so
I'm sorry to
comforting.
interrupt. Here's the problem with one of the things that the list that you read off is accurate. And one thing that I would add to it is when it comes to religion in this country, especially in the last 10, 15 years, I noticed that this is becoming a lot more prevalent. I have never seen a chemist, a physicist, or a biologist try to go to a church and hold a classroom meeting there. They have never brought their beakers into a church. They have never actually tried to do a class on evolution. They've never gone into a church and said, I want to teach you about Darwin. I want to teach you about evolution because you need to hear both sides of the story so that you can make up your mind. Why do religions have to come into the science classrooms under the guise of teaching both sides of the story when we know one of them is science and it's scientifically established fact, such as evolution, and the second side is basically written down in a book that I like to refer to as the Goat Herder's Guide to the Galaxy by Iron Age peasants who didn't know anything about the world, didn't know anything about physics, certainly didn't know anything about chemistry, aside from how to make weapons. But it's an insult to science that religion tries to invade scientific classrooms under the guise of teaching both sides of a story when one of them, quite frankly, is complete BS, in my opinion.
One of them isn't a side.
One of them isn't the side.
No.
One is science, the other one is conjuncture, and you can't have both into a science classroom.
It's also an insult to us and to all of our ancestors
Absolutely.
who made science, real science, possible after a long period of struggle and the difficulty of trying to acquire an actual knowledge of the world. It's not easy. It's easier to make up interesting folk tales and myths to explain things, to keep people under control, but it's a whole lot harder to investigate the nature of the world.
Absolutely.
Keep in mind that some of these people actually do have deeply felt, sincere beliefs. On the other hand, they are also protecting somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion cash cow. And if you think they're going to give that up without a struggle, and I don't mean a struggle having to do with debate, I mean a struggle having to do with hitting people on the head, for starters, you better think about that again, because the more powerful we become and the more competitive the religions become and the more desperate they become for cash and power, again, that's when push will come to shove.
That's why they're sometimes thought to be an immovable object.
The last thing that I would just add to that is every time society progressed forward in a positive way, it has always been through science. It's never been through religion, ever. Science has always been the driving force of both economic development, health development, and
That's because
we need to keep it that
science
way.
looks forward, religion looks backward.
There is no case in history where they have ever retracted a scientific theory and replaced it with a religious one because the science proved to be wrong and the religion proved to be correct. Not one case in history.
Science allows us to progress, but if you speak to people on the far right, progressive is absolutely a four-letter word.
Yeah, right.
It is, you're right. And
Change?
You're right. Well, shoot, it's barely 100 years since we even learned that germs exist, right?
That's true. That's remarkable.
And I guess I think the resistance is the resistance to accepting science is partially regulations. They don't want to see more regulations come in, and it's a threat to their beliefs that they've held so dearly for so many generations. I think, well, previous generations couldn't be wrong, right? Our grandfathers were the best farmers in the world while they watched their topsoil wash away.
Yeah, right.
But anyway.
Well, here's another little distinction. Science exists in the world while religion exists in your head.
That's all the time we have for tonight. Hope you'll join us again next week for another edition of the Atheist Forum, along with Tracy Thomas, Jim Peterson, Joe Reinhardt. I'm Ed Golly, reminding you if the story seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because somebody wrote it down.
Make them prove it.
Yeah.
You have been listening to the Atheist Forum. To learn more about Atheists of Florida, visit our website at atheistofflorida.com. Continue the discussion on our website, talk.aof.ngo. Join us again next Sunday for another edition of the Atheist Forum here on Tan Talk 1340.